All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Bitcoin Policy Hour weekly show brought to you by the Bitcoin Policy Institute. As usual, joined by Ken Egan, Head of Government Affairs, and Zack Shapiro, Head of Policy, and your host, Zack Cohen here. We've got a good topic list to dig into. Ken, we've got some clarity updates. Seems like there's not much to update on, which is probably the update itself. We've got some good AI stuff to talk about on the open source side. BPI has been working on a letter that will be live by the time this podcast comes out. So stay tuned to learn more about that and much more. So Ken, let's dig into it. What is going on with Clarity? We are officially in summer recess.
We are officially in summer recess. The Senate ran late into Saturday, late Friday night, early Saturday morning, but now they are back. Congress has the month of August off, and as observers will probably already know, Clarity Act was not on the agenda. Clarity did not get a vote, as we predicted last week, which is really unfortunate. I do have it on good authority that the vote that has been announced for September 15th will in fact happen on September 15th. There will be a Senate vote. So we'll see what happens. There's been a lot of debate in DC right now, sort of hindsight thinking. Should Thune have forced the Senate to vote on this thing and get people on record? I think, though, the inclination was still wanting to get it done rather than to score political points. So he agreed to defer and said, okay, we will give this yet another couple weeks of discussion. Now, everybody's going home in August. No one's going to be talking about it. We're kind of frozen until everybody's back in September. It's really unfortunate. And I'll be honest, like the National Sheriff's Association really threw a wrench into things. Their opposition has been really, really strident for reasons that escape me. I have my own theories, and I think a lot of it's just coalition politics. But I will, nonetheless, that last minute intervention, that letter they sent out last week, or maybe 10 days ago, had an impact, and it just prevented any sort of signs of movement. It just froze everything in time. So here we are. I remember probably on this podcast a year ago, we were like, it's going to be great. By Labor Day, it'll be done. Maybe by Thanksgiving. And here we are. It's like August.
Someone should pull the receipts on that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Do a compilation of.
Yeah, no, it sucks being right sometimes. Like, everybody wants to be right, but we just saw it coming. And, so September 15th, there will be a vote on September 15th, unless something really, really weird happens. But it's just unfortunate that it's going to come down to like sort of a political gun to the head vote as opposed to like, a negotiated deal that actually would have been good for Americans. But this is DC. That's not always top of the priority list.
Yeah. So let's kind of parse through this a little bit further, Ken, if you don't mind. So we'll come back in September, about a month from now, and they'll have like sort of 2 weeks before people go off to midterm campaigns. Is that right? Approximately.
Yeah. Congress is in session right now. I think into the first week in October. But they have essentially the whole month of September. So they've got 2 weeks to when they get back. I mean, there'll be a lot of staff negotiations. I mean, let's be honest, like it's mostly staff negotiations at this point. But nonetheless, these negotiations are not going to be happening through August. So we'll see. But I mean, the Majority Leader Thune has put on the calendar like there will be a vote on September 15th. The White House has told us there will be a vote on September 15th. And we'll see. And that'll be either it passes cloture, it gets that magic 60 vote number that they need, or it doesn't. But again, when you're that close to an election cycle, all votes like that become sort of politically charged. So there'll be all kinds of thinking and gaming and polling involved, as opposed to actually working out differences. But we'll see. This is what's come to a year late, as we anticipate this thing being addressed, and we'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. It's just unfortunate. I mean, it's really sort of it's interesting how much crypto's fortunes have changed in DC over the past 8 months. I mean, it went from like they couldn't gather weight fast enough to vote on Genius, and here we are, like months later, we're still arguing over the exact same things. We've been talking about Clarity since January.
Yeah. Interesting. And then our friend Patrick Witt, I think this is public information, but was intending to leave the White House, I think on the assumption that Clarity was at least going to get voted on, and has sort of signaled his an extension, you might say. So are you reading anything into that?
No, I think it's a joke. It's like the abusive spouse you can't get away from. No, but I think I mean, he's been working on this. Like he's poured a lot of energy and personal passion into this thing for the past let's 18 months, and he wants to see it through. I think he definitely wants to be there at least in time for a vote. So yeah, I mean he's good on him. He had other plans, but he's putting all that stuff aside. To make sure this bill gets voted on.
Yeah. Okay. Last question, and then we'll move on. I was listening to a podcast from friend of the pod, Alex Thorne and Natalia Lee from Galaxy, and she was mentioning something, and you would know this better than I do, about how sort of voting on something, typically you would want like more than 2 weeks, or like a previous vote on something to at least know where people stand. Like, what's the process for this? Is 2 weeks just like way too short for like a sort of first stab at it? Is that traditionally how they do things? They'll vote once, they'll kind of see how the dominoes fall, and then vote again. What's like the actual kind of logistics here?
I mean, this is a cloture vote, right? In the Senate, people talk about the filibuster. The filibuster exists because it doesn't allow whoever controls the chamber to get things onto the floor that essentially requires. You need a supermajority to even vote on things. Now, oftentimes, members will vote cloture to allow a bill to go on the floor because they want to vote against it. They have various reasons for wanting to vote against something. This is not like that. I think there are still Democrats that want to vote for this bill for all kinds of reasons. And so normally you wouldn't just force 2 weeks, but let's be honest, like we've been talking about this for a long time. The bill is not going to radically change. I think you'll see maybe tweaks in like the ethics language. Maybe, I don't even know. If nothing changes between now and September 15th, I wouldn't be surprised. But at this point, the majority leader wants to see everybody. We need to see a vote. Like this has been going on for way too long. I can only deal with like Hollywood people and drinking their Michelob Ultras out of little kid glasses, sitting in front on their backyards, in their backyards, talking about how they defeated it. Whatever, good for you, dude. Have another Mick Ultra in your kid glass. But we need to vote on this thing because it's actually good for America. So
yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we'll have a couple of policy hours between now and then where clarity won't come up. I think our record's been a little better recently, but we'll circle back.
And we will drink adult beer out of large glasses. So I'm just saying.
I love it. Yes, we will. Okay. Next topic on the list here, we've got some security updates following the Coldcard exploit and the efforts of our friend Rob Hamilton and the rest of the so-called red team, Bitcoin red team. So Ken, can you outline those for us? Obviously have the Coldcard situation. I don't think there's a ton more to share on that. We covered that in detail last week. So if you haven't listened to those episodes, definitely go ahead and do so. We had friend of the pod, Rob Hamilton, on, as well as James O'Byrne, also friend of the pod. But yeah, lots of good information there. More since we recorded that. So it looks like Ken, we wanted to cover Boltz, BTCPay Server, and anything else. So I'll let you jump in there, and then we can fill in.
Yeah, as the ongoing saga of a really sustained attack on Bitcoin protocols is continuing. Now, remember, these protocols have always been probed and looked at. It's just that AI has enabled really quick iteration of separate network exploitation activities. The latest people have seen was Boltz, which is a really important piece of Bitcoin infrastructure that enables cross-platform swaps between Lightning and Liquid. It's the back end of a lot of wallets and protocols. It also allowed integration of stablecoins to get them on-chain, off-chain. A really important piece, not just of infrastructure, but also, in my mind, as a privacy tool. A big fan of Boltz, and watching them go through what they've gone through has been unfortunate because of the role they play. And you've seen some of the knock-on effects of Boltz having to go down.
And can you just detail that real quick, kind of what the situation was there for folks who aren't familiar?
So again, because Boltz is a swap mechanism, they've got hot wallets, right? And they're always, when you're doing swaps, you've always got coins exposed to the internet. And as I understand it, the code base they built to manage all this was just being attacked. They've not publicly released what they've lost, and they did the responsible thing of just pulling the plug. But I'm decent authority that the attack was sustained. It was educated. They did a lot of reconnaissance. And the problem is with cyber network with CNE activities, the attacker just has to be right once. It takes a lot to identify and fix something that's built into your infrastructure. Like you pull a a lodestone out of a building, it falls down. You can't, and this is not like the attackers can exploit things very quickly, whereas defenders need time to sometimes one error to change to another, one vulnerability to change to another, and putting pieces together in a way that actually rebuilds your defenses is very complicated. And I think that the guys at Boltz just tried to outrun them for so long, and just decided that it was worth just pulling the plug and go offline and recoup from there. BTCPay Server is I don't know the details. I'm assuming it's a very similar idea. When you've got Lightning Network is this is the first time I think Lightning's being really battle tested from a cybersecurity perspective. But again, you've got hot wallets running on all kinds of infrastructure, and a lot of that is I don't know, have no idea how it's built. But whenever you have hot wallets touching different infrastructure and you've got swap mechanisms, you've got the equivalent of bridges, and you're going to create vulnerabilities. I mean, look what's happened even in the pre-AI era. I mean, look what like Lazarus has done to every EVM bridge, like Thor Bridge and Kelp DAO, and like they've been destroying these things for years because you're building in sort of vulnerabilities whenever you're kind of moving from one protocol to another. The Bitcoin network and the associated protocols have just been better built. But in the day, they're still exposed to the internet, and they still are exposed to flaws in code that maybe would not come up under normal code review. This is why the work that the red team is doing is so important, because they're iterating really, really quickly through code bases to discover vulnerabilities. And again, just because you find a vulnerability doesn't mean you're safe, because you have to fix it. And if you're finding a vulnerability, the adversary who are using the same tools are doing the same thing. So I don't think we've seen the end of this. I don't think it's unique to Bitcoin. The problem is just with protocols that that are in our ecosystem, they've got actual like value facing the internet, whereas banks don't, and we do. And this is when you're swapping and you have permissionless protocols, that exposure is a risk, and we've seen it with altcoins. Again, massive destruction over going back to the Axie, to the big hack. What was it? The game Axie. Remind me the name. It'll come back to him. Sorry. Thank the Ronin Bridge up through the Thor Bridge and Kelp DAO. I mean, they've been, because of the nature of the way those protocols are built, they're shaky. Bitcoin is not, but nonetheless, nothing faces the internet is perfect. And now we're seeing some of the limitations, and this is why Bitcoin developers have been burning the midnight oil. Pick your metaphor. For helping each other. And this is the thing, the community, after all the fighting over BIP 110, it's really cool to see like all the developers like pitching in. People are donating money to buy compute, and they're helping each other, because what affects Boltz affects BTCPay Server, affects everybody else, right? We want to see everybody succeed. We want to see all the good actors succeed. So this is why this effort is really.
Yep, 100%. Zach, let's get you in here. BPI, and we're recording on Monday, August 10th. Probably just a couple hours before this open letter releases, but we put together an open letter signed by, at this point, over 35 sort of industry groups, companies, exchanges who are custodying funds, development organizations who are funding open source developers, like really kind of the whole gamut of the industry and the ecosystem here, coming together and saying, look, it's really important that people in this industry, for the reasons that Ken was outlining, if you hack Coldcard, for example, you have access to the bearer asset. There's nothing sort of undoable about that. Basically going to the frontier labs and saying, hey, like we need to make sure that defenders of these technologies have access to frontier capabilities. And we've talked about this in the past, but I'm curious, like in this moment, right, with this letter coming out, like this has really come to the forefront, I think, especially in the last week. So I'm curious, your view on why this letter was important, why it's a initiative that BPI took on, and what's it going to take to sort of get this done properly, I guess, from a sort of policy perspective. Like, how would the Frontier Labs build a program where defenders like Rob Hamilton or the rest of the red team could get access to these frontier capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, we have talked about this before on the podcast. This letter should not have been necessary, and I think this is a really frustrating problem. I can't talk about the specifics, but I've been doing some work with the red team, and they are finding a shocking number of like pretty big vulnerabilities across the industry, including in very large, very well known companies that it's just like hard to argue are not critical infrastructure on the internet, not just in crypto, but like these are large companies with large holes that were just found by this small group of Bitcoin developers pointing open source AI tools for the most part at the open source code out there. And the problem with what's going on now is it is a race to do this. It is terrific what the red team folks are doing, but attackers can also do that at the same time. And as we saw with Coldcard, and the actual solution here is if there is going to be a gap between frontier capabilities and when those capabilities are available to the public via open source tools, there's no reason that our industry should be excluded from things like Project Glasswing, where there's an ability to do defense first before it is open season on offense. And I'm increasingly coming to the view that like there just should be a delay like that. That it is, whether or not the government should enforce it, like the right thing to do is like cyber is going to be a moving target and an ongoing threat. And we don't know if, which is going to win out between offense and defense. And it seems likely that offense might win. And so if you can give defenders a head start, that should happen. And so this letter, I think, is a plea for rationality here that we need to widen the aperture, including in Bitcoin world, about who is able to use powerful cyber capabilities to find and plug holes before bad actors, including our geopolitical adversaries that fund their missile programs with the proceeds of attacks, find and exploit those vulnerabilities, which exist out there all over the place, apparently.
And in terms of the actual like logistics here, I think maybe we've touched on this, but I want to try to be as specific as possible. Like if you're designing this program at Anthropic, for example, like what does the application process look like? How are you vetting good actors versus bad actors? Yeah, I'm curious if you have a view on that.
You want auditability, right? You want some version of KYC to understand who's getting access, but there is these capabilities are going to be out there at some point, right? So it's not like, oh, this is like nuclear weapons and we can keep it to a small group of, entities or countries that have access. Like this is something that's going to be made public. And the question is like, who do you trust to get a first crack at this? And making sure it's, largely US entities where you're subject to the jurisdiction of law enforcement and the courts. So, you're not giving it to Chinese actors that can do stuff and are they don't care about the consequences. Like that makes sense. Some amount of community vetting makes sense. I don't know exactly where the line is, but the line should be, or the circle should be much wider in circumference than it currently is. And there needs to be a major adjustment.
Right. I mean, if you look through Rob's tweets on X, it's pretty obvious that someone like Rob should not be getting sort of censored by the, OpenAI cyber program. Like, again, Rob is like going through all these open source libraries that are, without exaggeration, securing, hundreds of billions of dollars, probably trillions if you sort of, I don't know the exact details, but I presume, a lot of these projects that they're looking at are sort of just baseline, Bitcoin security questions or issues. And he's getting told, you can't do this with this tool. And so he's resorting to Kimi K3 or, GLM 5.2. And Ken, you made an interesting point to me this weekend, which is, we're sort of at a lose-lose right now. And I'll let you, sort of flesh this out a little bit more. But basically China, right, they're the ones who are, generally speaking, processing the payments. Like if someone steals Bitcoin, they're going to go to, some Chinese actor and they're going to launder the funds and they're going to get, whatever currency out that they want. And at the same time, these attacks are being done via Chinese models, right? And so they're getting the benefits of that as well. So this seems really bad for us in the States. I'm curious, how you kind of came to this and you're, you probably have a better explanation of this than I do.
Yeah, and I don't think any of these have been attributed yet. Maybe someone, in the DC area has attributed them, but I don't think, not publicly yet. I don't have any doubt that some of them will be North Korean related. Some of them will be, criminal gang related, but organized. Here's the thing: like, I know it's anybody can run these models and find the code, but there's a lot more that goes into it than just like finding the exploit. You've got like just alone the cash out place is like, single, as I said, like script kiddies in mom's basement are not cashing out the whatever 90 million bucks that someone has stolen from Coldcard users. These are large orchestrated attacks that require. I mean, the stealing of the Bitcoin is just the first step, right? It's a long way to go before you whittle down your $1 to 60 cents and all the associated costs of getting this stuff off chain and into whatever fiat you want to buy. So my point about the it was being it was sort of bombastic, but you've got but it's sort of the point though. I mean, it's certainly happening. Like when Lazarus steals money, they don't go to like Coinbase Pyongyang to like cash it out right there or insert your chain. It's always cashed out through trusted OTC brokers. A lot of those in China. I mean, there's research out there by Tier 1 Labs to prove that. So it's an untenable situation to think about that, like Rob and the guys and everybody else, researchers just sort of quietly suffering, going through this, trying to defend their protocols, having to result to downloading and buying tokens from Kimi or GLM or whichever lab, right? Even DeepSeek, I think some people are using the newest version. And when there's at the same time, like a lot of the proceeds, historically speaking, from these criminal activities have been cashed out in China. Like they're not going to be going to exchanges in Germany or Spain or Italy, no, or Poland. They're going to be going to OTC desks, in East Asia, predominantly China. So it was the point, though. It's like there's an asymmetry here of our policy and what our defenders are facing that needs to be reconciled.
Yeah. I think this is. I've seen a lot of people kind of commenting on this in terms of like, as an American, this feels like deeply wrong, right? Like I think it's sort of. It's prescient, right? Because this is, I think, the largest sort of technological change or, sort of biggest technological, upshift, right? That we've seen probably in our lifetime. And, for sure, like the frontier labs are leading, and it's great that those are American companies. And I think, generally speaking, as Americans, we're happy about that. And then stuff like this happens where you have, people defending systems that are also like deeply personal, right? Like this is people's retirement savings. This is sort of things that people have saved for. And I'm talking specifically about Bitcoin here, but in other cases, like saved for many, many years. And we're sort of leaving those vulnerable by not providing these defenders with the frontier capabilities. So I do think that there's this sort of like American ethos angle to all this. Zack, you weren't with us when we interviewed Rob and James, but I asked Rob, sort of point blank, like, hey, if you were to like make your case to a policymaker about why we should sort of defend like open source code here in the United States, and in particularly like open weights and open source AI, what would it be? And I was imagining he was going to say something sort of along the lines of, hey, this is like critical infrastructure for the United States. Like this is, Bitcoin is very important to our sort of larger, economic strategy, whatever it may be. And he was basically like, look, no, this is like pretty simple. Like this is just, that would be like anti-American. That would be sort of anti-free speech, right? So I'm curious your view on this, to what extent this sort of like American ethos plays in I guess the question that we're asking, but also the kind of broader, AI policy question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is it's not simple, right? These are double-edged swords, and the same tools that are good for defense are good for offense, and the same tools that are good for curing cancer are good for creating bioweapons, and the same tools that are good for creating more abundance and intelligence are, have like X risk. And this is a really hard policy area, and it's not clear what the right thing to do is. I think, like, narrowly scoped, should we give more good actors access to things like Project Glasswing specifically for the cyber threat? Yes, like that, I think I have like a pretty clear answer to. But writ large, like, what should we do? I mean, like, I think, with open source, it's very hard to stop open source technology. If it is going to proliferate overseas, like, it seems foolish to specifically make it less available here, especially for people that want to use technology, for defensive means. But the macro policy questions are just hard. I am all for free speech and sort of individual liberty, and I think that should be our, broadly speaking, our North Star. But like, it's also not a suicide pact.
An interesting thing is, Zach, like this what's happening to Bitcoin right now is throwing a wrench into the policy conversation. Because before it was like closed models, dangerous, scary. OpenAI and Claude are just felons waiting to happen, right? Violators of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and we must control them. But now it is. I mean, I'm just speculating here. It is doubtful that these actors are using Mythos to conduct these attacks. They're probably using open source models, and it inverts the discussion now because they've got time to do it, right? When you can, what is one of the most important indicators of of an AI's power? It's time too, right? It's how much inference you can throw at something. And now we're in a situation now that where we're not asking, we're having a different discussion. This is the power of these models, which up till now has been debated because of its power to do bad things. Now we're the Bitcoiners, as usual, like at the forefront of all the good and bad. Are saying no, we need these models for the good things they can do, and that's just not the conversation that's happening. I mean, we've been discussing this for the past couple of days, right? I've been like knocking on doors all across the city. People are just starting to wake up to the fact that this is happening. Like on the crypto theft stuff, yeah, like the national security people have known about this for a long time. It's been these weird protocols overseas, and it hasn't really affected. It hasn't really affected Americans in a sense, like directly for a lot of people that policymakers make decisions about. Like the Ronin Bridge, $600 million, whatever it was at the time. Okay, sorry. The concern was like North Korea did this, and what do we do about that? This is a very different discussion. Now, this is these are largely American companies, certainly American users, law-abiding, who are now being attacked and need the power that the things that make some of these models so scary, the closed source models, the frontier labs. We need them because they actually offer some good things as well. You take that power and use it for good. But this is not the discussion, so it takes. The policy ship is a freaking big boat. It takes forever to turn it. So trying to introduce this new angle to the discussion is really sort of a third angle, right? It was yes or no. Now it's like, well, yes, maybe in some circumstances. And that's what we're asking. Whenever you're asking policymakers to think about something that doesn't fit into a binary box, it just takes time. It takes time. And, this is one of the reasons why we're putting out this letter with a lot of the very prominent signatories is because we need policymakers to pay attention to it. And it's not, I think we'll get some sympathetic hearings, but it's going to take a little bit of time. But 2 weeks when you're that's the thing is interesting about these AI models is the attacks is like hackers sleep. They can eat Cheetos and drink Monster, but eventually they got to go home. Right? There's limits to how much a human can do. When you can just feed these things tokens and let them iterate all day, all night. How do you keep up? And 2 weeks is a very, very long time. I don't know how long 2 weeks is for C&E operator time. If you 2 weeks with K3, burning through tokens, it's probably weeks and weeks and weeks of like individual C&E operator time, like a dude at keyboard doing the things. Think about that. So every day, this is not. Oh, we'll figure this out in 2 weeks. I mean, this is an exponential problem that needs to be addressed right now. So hence the letter, and hence all of our chest banging on this podcast, and to anybody else who will listen. But they're coming for Bitcoin first, but there are lots of pots of money and good information all across the economy. And Bitcoin is just first.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about this a little bit more. Right, Ken, I think your point is well taken. Like previously, it was like, yes or no, open source, open weight. Like, are we in favor or are we not? And I think Zack, your initial proposal of like, hey, we need to make sure that before the Chinese labs can distill, our frontier capabilities, that these defenders have access to the frontier capabilities, right? That seems like a really great first step. But like, is it the case that distillation period is always going to be, sufficient to discover the vulnerabilities fast enough? I think there's interesting questions, and I'll let you take this in whatever direction you want, about sort of the safety of code more broadly. Like I think somebody on X was commenting any code that was written like pre-AI is actually probably vulnerable at this point. And so that's going to take a massive sort of overhaul of almost all of our existing software. Are there going to need to be sort of representations made about whether code has been reviewed by AI for certain vulnerabilities? Like, I'm just curious if you have a view about kind of the direction of travel here.
The direction of travel is more cyber attacks. Like, probably no. The distillation period is not going to be long enough to find all of the flaws in important code, and like bad stuff is going to happen. And like, I don't really know what the policy answer is. I was debating this with former pod member Matt Pines this weekend, who is more sort of bullish on this than I am. But I just like
cyber. Bullish on what exactly?
What?
Bullish on what exactly?
Bullish on like this is gonna work out okay, and we shouldn't be as worried from a policy perspective. And I think we should be pretty worried. And I think there might be legitimate policy steps to take. I don't know exactly what those are, but I don't know. I don't remember if we've talked so far about the like OpenAI incident, but like some version of autonomy and X risk is, I think, already proving to be real. AI, not because it hates us, but because it is being trained to act autonomously and seek goals in whatever creative way it can, sort of banging its head against the wall until it finds some way out. Like that problem is already happening and going to get worse. One of the, just to stick to the crypto piece of this, or really even specifically the Bitcoin piece of this, like with stablecoins, you can cancel them. With like certain altcoins, you can pressure the company into sort of like taking the value out of those coins. Bitcoin is a deep and liquid market that nobody controls. If you think about the sort of like, convergence problem where like whatever AI is going to want to do, whatever goals you give it or it has, there are some things it will converge on in order to like try and do that, right? Like it's going to want to have resources. Money is helpful towards getting those resources. And so any misaligned AI, whether it is misaligned because a bad actor gave it a bad thing to do, or it's misaligned because, you're testing it on an eval innocently and it doesn't know not to cheat on the test by doing cyber attacks. Insecure Bitcoin is a really useful step towards a lot of different goals, and this is going to become a big problem. Like, beyond just the cyber problem, beyond people just losing their savings, it's all right, what does the AI do with the Bitcoin? Like the problem is like it's very hard to stop open source. The policies that would be targeted at that, I think, are a really tough pill to swallow, and I wouldn't want to advocate for those. But like there's going to be more hacking.
Are you almost at the point of saying like this is more urgent than Q-Day?
Than what?
Than Q-Day, like a quantum attack?
As an existential threat to Bitcoin, no. I mean, ironically, like this could, this would be one sort of perverse subspecies of our thesis about agents wanting to use Bitcoin and price up. But
he's revealing himself.
but for society, like, I mean, Q-Day is bad for Bitcoin and it's bad for society because everything becomes insecure, or cryptography becomes insecure. But before then, we have this rolling problem of our code being insecure in ways that are complicated and hard to see. And so, this is an urgent problem today.
Yeah, Ken, I'm curious if you have a view on this.
There's a video, you can find it on YouTube. It's from this year's Black Hat, when a guy from OpenAI kind of walked through what happened. And it's super interesting because you watch, examples of the agents collaborating with each other. But a lot of it is about, about precision and instructions, what they were prompted to do, what guardrails they were given. It's very interesting, but I encourage people, if you're interested in this, it's about a half hour long. Just go to like Black Hat OpenAI and you'll find it. It's definitely worth it. It's a very interesting discussion. The problem I think you're going to have also with that we're going to confront is like right now these are just big models that people are using, but eventually as these things get better and more tailored, like you can easily find yourself in a place where open source models are used and trained, or frankly any model. It doesn't, open source just means you can see the weights, it doesn't make it good or bad. Any model can be trained to align with the incentives of bad actors, and you're seeing a little bit of that I think with some of these hacks. I don't know that if you've watched the OpenAI thing, for example, it doesn't think you. It kind of sort of knew it was violating instructions a little bit, but again, it's interesting watching sort of thinking process. But I'm with Zack in the near term and with Pines in the long term. I think we'll find ourselves in. I think we have a rough couple of years. I don't think this is months. I think this is a couple of years of challenges, where it's going to be very expensive. There's going to be huge data breaches. Bitcoin's bad enough, but like again, every adult in certainly the United States has probably had their personal their PII stolen, but it's just going to get worse. There'll be data breaches, insecure payments, all kinds of weird things are going to happen over the next couple of years. I think this leads us to a place, assuming it's ahead of Q Day, where critical infrastructure systems, and I mean that across the economy, payments, banks, water, for example. God, I mean, so you want to look at vulnerabilities. They look at like your local water treatment plant. Like forget it, train wreck. But we'll find ourselves in a place after a lot of wreckage where we could live in a relatively secure cyber universe, but getting there is not going to be pleasant, and it's going to require, because this is complicated, it's going to require some really thoughtful and creative policy. And I don't know, we don't do that very well. I don't think it's going to get better, to be honest with you. So it's going to fall a lot on private industry to do this the right way. Which again, this I think this is why our letter's not going to like change the world, but its point though is to like raise a point to those who sit on top of the most powerful tools right now, that these tools are dangerous. By the way, you built them, but they are dangerous, but they also have great promise. So let's collectively try to find a way that you employ these in a way that's good for everybody, and that also moves us toward a sort of a larger kind of new stability in the cyber world. But I do think we're in for a couple of kind of rough years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the interesting angle here also is like, the role that the different labs are playing in this process, right? Like, I don't know where Mark Zuckerberg does his like communications. Maybe it's on like Facebook or something, but he's been supposedly on a bit of a tear. They released a new open source model. He has been sort of talking about how we need to be building, more energy and data center infrastructure. He also tweeted that, or not tweeted, but communicated somewhere that the AI labs should proactively share intermediate training checkpoints. This is via MTS Live, by the way, on X. Intermediate training checkpoints and technical staff with the U.S. government so they can harden critical systems against new risks early. So I want to explore this a little bit. We've seen a little bit of how I think the labs are trying to sort of interface with the U.S. government. I'm curious if there's going to be sort of continued like homogeneity in that. Are there going to be labs like Meta who come out and say, hey, we're going like full open source. We want to be, sort of increasingly like transparent from a public perspective and go that route versus the more kind of behind closed doors, so-called regulatory capture approach. I'm curious if either of you have thoughts on the role that the labs will play in this, and whether there's like sort of some kind of competition built into that, right? Because traditionally it's been really just the two, OpenAI and Anthropic, and it's interesting to see sort of Zuckerberg coming onto the scene, and I don't know how much he's coming onto the scene, but is there sort of a counterweight effect with some of the stuff he's talking about right now?
But on the other side, though, like there's the speculation about what happened at Google when Demis Hospice was removed.
Yeah.
Does that mean that Google's I think it's the largest infrastructure provider in the world? Has Google decided that they don't need to be at the cutting edge of frontier AI, that they can do their thing just fine, with their billions of users, with their just sort of like tier 2 frontier model. And let the duopoly emerge. I think the one thing about the labs right now is they're really in a position to dictate terms, if they do it smartly. Again, Dario is he's such a lightning rod because he's been controversial with the things he said. And again, OpenAI, Sam Altman's got a really mixed reputation in DC. But a credible voice coming out of these labs is really in a position to dictate terms, in the sense that we have this idea that we think will safeguard our networks against will safeguard us from the offensive use of our tools, but will empower people at some kind of gradient with the defensive layer. So I just don't think they've gotten there yet. But I think if you had the right voice, you could come to DC and literally dictate terms and say, this is what we're going to do, and DC be happy to do it because it scratches all the itches. We're not going to give everybody mythos, but at the same time, our industry that are increasingly going to be clamoring for cutting edge defense will have access to it through a process, and whatever that process is, and that process will be probably end up being sort of extractive, right? But I think at this point, people are willing to pay the price of that process right now, because it's more important. When you're facing existential challenges, you don't get the luxury of I'm principled against KYCing for something. I mean, people can do that, but those platforms probably won't they won't survive. But the labs just seem, I don't know. I've never been a billionaire who headed up a lab, so I don't know what the optics of their universe look like, what the physics are like. I'm sure they're different than ours, but they are in a position to proactively dictate terms in a way that could help the policymakers get out of this conundrum, because I just don't know how this is going to.
Yeah, Zach, I'm curious on your read of the Google situation. Do you agree with Ken in that they're sort of maybe taking their foot off the gas a little bit? Do you think maybe there's something else going on there? And then if you want to think about the broader question of kind of how the labs are competing.
I mean, I definitely don't think they're taking their foot off the gas. Something is going on there, right? It seems to be somewhat of a meltdown, not at Google, but at Google Gemini. My sense of what is going on, if I had to guess, and sort of from reporting I've seen, is that there's basically just an institutional sort of channel question about, is Google going to take its resources and pour that all into compute to be able to serve companies like Anthropic that are out ahead, or is it going to use all of that compute to pour into its own frontier models to try and compete with the frontier labs that are out ahead? Folks like Dennis are seeing the opportunity in the market today to go do their own thing and work on cutting edge problems, probably in a more satisfying environment where they get to just focus on the stuff that they find interesting, instead of being inside a giant hyperscaler with giant headcount and sort of shareholders, in the public market to think about. And once you start to lose the momentum there, then folks leave. But I wouldn't read that personally. I'm very bullish on the position that Google is sitting in the market. I think that they are a good bet. Just as an AI play, not that they're going to overnight have a model that's better than Anthropic or OpenAI. I don't think they will, but they're amassing a lot of compute. They have a lot of data, and
users.
Yeah. And it's in the short term, they can make a lot of money by renting out that compute to the hyperscalers, who, if the frontier labs get in the business too much of owning token production, they can get over their skis in a way that Google's balance sheet protects it from. And in the event that one of these labs makes a misstep, I would think that Google would be a very strong candidate to buy OpenAI, or first of all, they own a decent chunk of Anthropic now. But if Anthropic were to get over its skis on compute build out and the numbers weren't to tie out, you could see Google swallowing Anthropic whole, perhaps, even if it were public. So I think Google is recognizing sort of what Gemini is. There is this attempt to do a big training run. We'll see how that works out. But I think this is a story sort of localized to Google Gemini and not to sort of Alphabet as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And then to the broader question of, sort of how the labs are interacting, do you think that someone like Meta can be a meaningful counterweight? Again, this is all signaling. We don't really know what's happening behind closed doors, but I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Doesn't look like it right now.
Cool. Okay.
I was getting ready to be like, I'm sorry, I lost audio. What'd you say?
Yeah, right.
Sorry, my screen went dark.
Okay, and then just kind of double tapping on the Meta open source or open weight situation. Obviously, I haven't had a chance to use the model. I haven't seen anybody else on X talking about it. It seems like sort of past efforts to open source frontier capabilities, or even just short of frontier capabilities, have been sort of weak. From U.S. labs and U.S. companies. I'm curious whether this sort of tone shift that I think we've all perceived over the last kind of week or two, around open source, whether we see that sort of applying pressure on these labs to open source. It seems like from a first principles perspective, of course they wouldn't, because there's this sort of zero sum nature of AI tokens. But I'm curious, like what you're reading into, both of you, what you're reading into this move by Meta to, supposedly put out a very high powered, open weight model.
Honestly, I'm not sure. I mean, Zuck has gone through a lot of iterations for different things he's focused on.
Including his haircut.
I mean, he does MMA now, so I don't want him like finding me and choking me out. Right. But yeah, I'll be honest, Zach, I don't know. I follow the news. I've been interested in Meta just from like a securities perspective, but yeah, I've never been able to pull the trigger on it. I think he seems to bounce from thing to thing. So I'll be honest, I have no strong opinion on it.
I think it makes sense. I think there will be more open source models as the open source sort of benchmarks move further up. They will become more useful. There are going to be companies that, for both data sovereignty reasons and economic reasons, won't want to be tied to a specific open frontier lab, and it makes sense. And are they going to win this race? How are they going to do versus sort of Mira Murati's company or the other sort of American or foreign open source labs? I don't know, but it's not at all a crazy thing to pursue.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I'm at the end of my list here. We got a nice tight rip for the day. Anything either of you want to talk about before we call it a day?
Support the red team. Support the red team.
100%.
I think they're raising money through OpenSats now, aren't they?
That's correct. Yeah. Sure. If you appreciate the work that you're doing, and you should appreciate the work that they're doing, consider making a donation to them through OpenSats. I believe all the funding for that is going straight to token usage. So no pass through, nothing like that. OpenSats is very good about that. So definitely consider doing that. We've got our event coming up 6 weeks out. Be remiss not to bring it up here. So Freedom Tech DC, September 21st through 23rd. We'll continue the conversations that we're having here with some folks kind of at the forefront of the different industries. So digital assets, Bitcoin in particular, AI, energy and compute, data centers, the whole 9 yards. So that's going to be a great conversation. Going to keep that pretty intimate. So looking forward to that. You can find more information at btcpolicy.org/summit. And yeah, this was a good rip. I think we're sort of running into a lot of the issues that are coming to the forefront here. It's always enjoyable to try to unpack them, even if we don't have a ton of thoughts on them, right in this moment. So come back next week. We'll have a similar conversation then. And yeah, thanks for tuning in.
Peace.